you will soon find it factually and theologically true that man by nature is a damn mess. The 4.5-ounce thing in silk wrappings that trembles with the underskin motions of the flesh becomes a stick without brains, refusing anything simple that is wanted of it. All that a rod has to do is lift the line, the leader, and the fly off the water, give them a good toss over the head, and then shoot them forward so they will land in the water without a splash in the following order: fly, transparent leader, and then the line. Otherwise, the fish will see the fly as a fake and be gone. Of course, there are special casts that anyone could predict would be difficult, and they require artistry. Casts where the line can't go over the fisherman's head because cliffs or trees are immediately behind, sideways casts to get the fly under overhanging willows, and so on. But what's remarkable about just a straight cast? Just picking up a rod with line on it and tossing the line across the river? Well, until man is redeemed, he will always take a fly rod too far back, just as natural man always overswings with an axe or golf club and loses all his power somewhere in the air. Only with a rod it's worse, because the fly often comes so far back it gets caught behind in a bush or rock. When my father said it was an art that ended at 2 o'clock, he often added closer to 12 than to 2, meaning that the rod should be taken back only slightly farther than overhead, straight overhead being 12 o'clock. Then, since it is natural for man to try to attain power without recovering grace, he whips the line back and forth, making it whistle each way, and sometimes even snapping off the fly from the leader. But the power that was going to transport the little fly across the river somehow gets diverted into building a bird's nest of line, leader, and fly that falls out of the air into the water about 10 feet in front of the fisherman. If, though, he pictures the round trip of the line, transparent leader, and fly from the time they leave the water until their return, they are easier to cast. They naturally come off the water heavy line first and in front, and light transparent leader and fly trailing behind. But as they pass overhead, they have to have a little beat of time so the light transparent leader and fly can catch up to the heavy line now starting forward and again fall behind it. Otherwise, the line starting on its return trip will collide with the leader and fly still on their way up. The mess will be the bird's nest that splashes into the water 10 feet in front of the fisherman. Almost the moment, however, that the forward order of line, leader, and fly is reestablished, it has to be reversed, because the fly and transparent leader must be ahead of the heavy line when they settle on the water. If what the fish sees is highly visible line, what the fisherman will see are departing black darts, and he might as well start for the next hole. High overhead, then, on the forward cast at about 10 o'clock, the fisherman checks again. The 4-count rhythm, of course, is functional. The 1 count takes the line, leader, and fly off the water. The 2 count tosses them seemingly straight into the sky. The 3 count was my father's way of saying that at the top the leader and fly have to be given a little beat of time to get behind the line as it is starting forward. The 4 count means put on the power, throw the line into the rod until you reach 10 o'clock. Then check cast. Let the fly and leader get ahead of the line and coast to a soft and perfect landing. Power comes not from power everywhere, but from knowing where to put it on. Remember, as my father kept saying, it is an art that is performed on a 4-count rhythm between 10 and 2 o'clock. My father was very sure about certain matters pertaining to the universe. To him, all good things, trout as well as eternal salvation, come by grace, and grace comes by art, and art does not come easy. So my brother and I learned to cast Presbyterian style on a metronome. It was Mother's metronome, which Father had taken from the top of the piano in town. She would occasionally peer down to the dock from the front porch of the cabin, wondering nervously whether her metronome could float if it had to. When she became so overwrought that she thumped down the dock to reclaim it, my father would clap out the 4-count rhythm with his cupped hands. Eventually, he introduced us to literature on the subject. He tried always to say something stylish as he buttoned the glove on his casting hand. Isaac Walton, he told us when my brother was 13 or 14, is not a respectable writer. He was an Episcopalian and a bait fisherman. Although Paul was 3 years younger than I was, he was already far ahead of me in anything relating to fishing, and it was he who first found a copy of The Complete Angler and reported back to me, "The bastard doesn't even know how to spell complete. Besides, he has songs to sing to dairymaids." I borrowed his copy and reported back to him, "Some of those songs are pretty good." He said, "Who ever saw a dairymaid on the Big Blackfoot River?" "I would like," he said, "to get him for a day's fishing on the Big Blackfoot, with a bet on the side." The boy was very angry, and there has never been a doubt in my mind that the boy would have taken the Episcopalian money. When you are in your teens, maybe throughout your life, being 3 years older than your brother often makes you feel he is a boy. However, I knew already that he was going to be a master with a rod. He had those extra things besides fine training, genius, luck, and plenty of self-confidence. Even at this age, he liked to bet on himself against anybody who would fish with him, including me, his older brother. It was sometimes funny and sometimes not so funny to see a boy always wanting to bet on himself and almost sure to win. Although I was 3 years older, I did not yet feel old enough to bet. Betting, I assumed, was for men who wore straw hats on the back of their heads. So I was confused and embarrassed the first couple of times he asked me if I didn't want a small bet on the side, just to make things interesting. The third time he asked me must have made me angry, because he never again spoke to me about money, not even about borrowing a few dollars when he was having real money problems. We had to be very careful in dealing with each other. I often thought of him as a boy, but I could never treat him that way. He was never my kid brother. He was a master of an art. He did not want any big brother advice or money or help, and in the end I could not help him. Since one of the earliest things brothers try to find out is how they differ from each other, one of the things I remember longest about Paul is this business about his liking to bet. He would go to county fairs to pretend that he was betting on the horses, like the men, except that no betting booths would take his bets because they were too small and he was too young. When his bets were refused, he would say, as he said of Isaac Walton and any other he took as a rival, "I'd like to get that bastard on the Blackfoot for a day, with a bet on the side." By the time he was in his early 20s, he was in the big stud poker games. Circumstances, too, helped to widen our differences. The draft of World War I immediately left the woods short of men, so at 15 I started working for the United States Forest Service, and for many summers afterwards I worked in the woods, either with the Forest Service or in logging camps. I liked the woods and I liked work, but for a good many summers I didn't do much fishing. Paul was too young to swing an axe or pull a saw all day. Besides, he had decided this early he had two major purposes in life: to fish and not to work, at least not allow work to interfere with fishing. In his teens, then, he got a summer job as a lifeguard at the municipal swimming pool, so in the early evenings he could go fishing, and during the days he could look over girls in bathing suits and date them up for the late evenings. When it came to choosing a profession, he became a reporter on a Montana paper. Early then, he had come close to realizing life's purposes, which did not conflict in his mind from those given in answer to the first question of the Westminster Catechism. Undoubtedly, our differences would not have seemed so great if we had not been such a close family. Painted on one side of our Sunday school wall were the words, "God is love." We always assumed that these three words were spoken directly to the four of us in our family, and had no reference to the world outside, which my brother and I soon discovered was full of bastards, the number increasing rapidly the farther one gets from Missoula, Montana. We also held in common the knowledge that we were tough. This knowledge increased with age, at least until we were well into our 20s, probably longer, possibly much longer. But our differences showed even in our toughness. I was tough by being the product of tough establishments, the United States Forest Service and logging camps. Paul was tough by thinking he was tougher than any establishment. My mother and I watched horrified morning after morning while the Scottish minister tried to make his small child eat oatmeal. My father was also horrified, at first because a child of his own bowels would not eat God's oats, and as the days went by, because his wee child proved tougher than he was. As the minister raged, the child bowed his head over the food and folded his hands as if his father were saying grace. The child gave only one sign of his own great anger. His lips became swollen. The hotter my father got, the colder the porridge, until finally my father burned out. Each of us then not only thought he was tough, he knew the other one had the same opinion of himself. Paul knew that I had already been foreman of forest fire crews, and that if he worked for me and drank on the job, as he did when he was reporting, I would tell him to go to camp, get his time slip, and keep on down the trail. I knew that there was about as much chance of his fighting fire as of his eating oatmeal. We held in common one major theory about street fighting. If it looks like a fight is coming, get in the first punch. We both thought that most bastards aren't so tough as they talk, even bastards who look as well as talk tough. If suddenly they feel a few teeth loose, they will rub their mouths, look at the blood on their hands, and offer to buy a drink for the house. But even if they still feel like fighting, as my brother said, you are one big punch ahead when the fight starts. There is just one trouble with this theory. It is only statistically true. Every once in a while you run into some guy who likes to fight as much as you do, and is better at it. You start off by loosening a few of his teeth, he may try to kill you. I suppose it was inevitable that my brother and I would get into one big fight, which also would be the last one. When it came, given our theories about street fighting, it was like the battle hymn, terrible and swift. There are parts of it I did not see. I did not see our mother walk between us to try to stop us. She was short and wore glasses, and even with them on, did not have good vision. She had never seen a fight before, or had any notion of how bad you can get hurt by becoming mixed up in one. Evidently, she just walked between her sons. The first I saw of her was the gray top of her head, the hair tied in a big knot with a big comb in it. But what was most noticeable was that her head was so close to Paul I couldn't get a good punch at him. Then I didn't see her anymore. The fight suddenly seemed to stop itself. She was lying on the floor between us. Then we both began to cry and fight in a rage, each one shouting, "You son of a bitch, you knocked my mother down." She got off the floor and, blind without her glasses, staggered in circles between us, saying without recognizing which one she was addressing, "No, it wasn't you. I just slipped and fell." So this was the only time we ever fought. Perhaps we always wondered which of us was tougher. But if boyhood questions aren't answered before a certain point in time, they can't ever be raised again. So we returned to being gracious to each other, as the wall suggested that we should be. We also felt that the woods and rivers were gracious to us when we walked together beside them. It is true that we didn't often fish together anymore. We were both in our early 30s now, and now, from here on, is the summer of 1937. My father had retired, and he and my mother were living in Missoula, our old hometown, and Paul was a reporter in Helena, the state capital. I had gone off and got married, to use my brother's description of this event in my life. At the moment, I was living with my wife's family in the little town of Wolf Creek. But since Wolf Creek is only 40 miles from Helena, we still saw each other from time to time, which meant, of course, fishing now and then together. In fact, the reason I had come to Helena now was to see him about fishing. The fact also is that my mother-in-law had asked me to, I wasn't happy.